So which part do you want to lie about first? I asked her, and for the first time in 12 years of marriage, Olivia didn't have an answer. She froze right there in the doorway, one hand still wrapped around the handle of her suitcase, the wheels leaving faint tracks across the hardwood floor like evidence she didn't realize she was dragging behind her. Her tan was fresh, too fresh for a corporate retreat in Chicago, and the silence between us stretched longer than it should have, heavy, unnatural, like the air before a storm that already decided where it was going to land. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't step closer. I just stood there, watching the woman I married try to calculate how much I knew, and more importantly, how much I could prove. Because this wasn't about suspicion anymore. It hadn't been for a while. 14 days earlier, Olivia kissed me goodbye in our driveway, told me she'd be off the grid for a leadership summit, said the schedule would be packed, meetings from sunrise to late evening, networking dinners, team-building nonsense. I remember nodding, grabbing my coffee, acting like it was just another Monday morning. That was the first lie. Not hers. Mine. Because even then, something didn't sit right. It was too clean. Too rehearsed. Olivia had always been organized, but this felt different. Like she was reading from a script she'd already practiced. I watched her car disappear down the street, the sound of her tires fading into the quiet of our suburban neighborhood, and for a second, everything looked normal. House. Mailbox. Lawn I mowed every Saturday. The kind of life people point at and call stable. But stability has a sound when it starts to crack. It's subtle. Easy to ignore. And I almost did. The first real crack showed up 6 hours later when I called her office to confirm a minor detail about her itinerary. Not because I was suspicious. That's what I told myself anyway. Just a simple question about a client she mentioned. The receptionist paused. Too long. Then she said something I still remember word for word. Olivia? She's not scheduled for any off-site events this month. I didn't react. I didn't correct her. I just thanked her and hung up, staring at my phone like it had just handed me a version of my life I didn't recognize. That was the moment everything shifted. Not exploded. Not collapsed. Just shifted. Quietly. Permanently. Most people, when they hear something like that, they confront it. They call. They demand answers. They chase the truth like it owes them something. I didn't. I went to work. Sat through meetings. Answered emails. Smiled when I was supposed to. But in the back of my mind, something was already moving, already rearranging pieces I didn't even know I was playing with. Because if there's one thing I've learned after 38 years, it's this. Truth doesn't disappear. It waits. And when it comes back, it doesn't knock. It walks straight through the front door and looks you in the eye. Just like Olivia did, 14 days later. After that call, I stopped looking for reassurance and started looking for patterns, because lies are not built to last, they are built to hold just long enough, and once you know where to look, they start to show themselves in the smallest details, the kind most people ignore, the kind I used to ignore too, like the way Olivia's texts became too consistent, too measured. Always arriving at clean intervals as if she had scheduled them between something else, something she did not want me to see. Good morning messages at exactly 8, updates about meetings that sounded more like summaries than real experiences, no background noise when she called, no voices, no interruptions, just her voice, calm, controlled, like she was standing in an empty room rehearsing a role she had already memorized. And that was when I noticed something else, something even smaller, the timestamps. Because Chicago is in Central Time and we live on the East Coast, but Olivia never adjusted, every message came through like she had not moved an inch, like she was still in the same time zone, the same routine, the same pattern. And that was not a mistake people make when they travel for work, not someone like her, not someone who planned everything down to the minute. So I did not confront her, I did not ask questions, I just started documenting. Quietly, methodically, like a man who already knows the answer but needs to understand the shape of the truth. I checked our shared accounts first, nothing obvious, no large withdrawals, no suspicious charges, just the usual bills, groceries, utilities, the kind of clean financial trail that tells you someone is trying very hard to look normal. And then I went deeper, credit statements that did not link directly, archived emails. Things most people forget exist, and that was where I found the first real piece, a hotel confirmation forwarded to an address I did not recognize, but the name on the reservation was hers, Olivia Carter, and underneath it, one more name, Daniel Brooks, 2 adults, 1 room, 14 nights, the exact same 14 days she told me she would be in conference rooms and networking dinners. I stared at that screen longer than I should have, not because I was shocked, but because everything suddenly made sense in a way that felt almost quiet, almost inevitable. Like the ending of a story you did not want to believe but always knew was coming, and still, I did nothing, no calls, no messages, no accusations, because reacting would have warned her, and warning her would have ruined everything, so instead I kept going. I checked his profile, Daniel Brooks, her so-called work husband, the name she used jokingly at company events. The one she laughed about in front of people like it was harmless, like it was nothing, and yet his calendar was blocked out for the same 2 weeks, no meetings, no travel logs, just empty space where a life should have been. And that was when the picture became complete, not messy, not confusing, just clear, painfully clear. They did not disappear for work, they disappeared for each other, and the only thing left for me to decide was not whether it was true, but what I was going to do with it, and for the first time in years, I chose not to react, I chose to wait. Because patience is not weakness, it is control, and control is what turns the truth into something far more powerful than anger ever could be. Once you see the pattern, you cannot unsee it, and over the next few days, everything Olivia did started to fall into place with a precision that felt almost rehearsed, like I was watching a performance instead of living a marriage. Every message she sent carried the same tone, light, casual, controlled, asking about my day, reminding me to take care of myself, small details that would have felt comforting if I did not already know they were part of something else, something designed to keep me calm while she was somewhere I was not supposed to imagine. And the strange part was not the lie itself, it was how normal she tried to make it feel, like routine could erase reality, like consistency could replace truth. But consistency is exactly what exposed her, because real life is messy, unpredictable, full of interruptions, and Olivia's version of it had none, not a single moment where something went wrong, not a delayed reply, not a rushed sentence, not even background noise during her calls, just silence and her voice, steady as if she was standing in a place where nothing existed outside of what she wanted me to hear. So I started listening differently, not to her words, but to what was missing between them, and that silence told me more than anything she could have said. It told me she was not where she claimed to be, it told me she was not alone, and it told me she believed I would never question it, and that belief, more than anything else, is what made this easy for me. Because people who think they are safe stop covering their tracks, they relax, they make small mistakes, and those mistakes start to add up, one by one, until the truth builds itself without you needing to force it. I checked the hotel again, confirmed the dates, the room type, even the view they had chosen, something overlooking the water, the kind of detail you do not pick for business travel. And then I went further. I called the hotel, not as a husband, not as someone looking for answers, but as a man verifying a reservation, calm, polite, forgettable, and they confirmed what I already knew too. Guests checked in together, no separation, no confusion, just a simple confirmation that what I had in front of me was not a misunderstanding, it was a decision she made, and after that, I stopped looking for proof and started building structure, because proof without action is just pain, and I was not interested in pain anymore, I was interested in control. I contacted a lawyer the next morning, early, before work, before emails, before anything that could pull my focus away, and I laid everything out, the timeline, the documentation, the financial records, every piece of information I had collected. And I remember the way he looked at me, not surprised, not even particularly concerned, just focused, like this was not unusual, like this was something he had seen before. And maybe that was the moment I understood this was no longer personal in the way I thought it was. This was a situation, a structure, something that could be handled if you stayed calm enough to see it clearly. He told me to keep everything as it was, not to confront her, not to change my behavior, not to give her any reason to suspect I knew. Because once she suspected, she would adapt, she would protect herself. And everything I had would become harder to use, so I followed that advice exactly. I went back to my routine, went to work, came home, responded to her messages like nothing had changed, and in those 14 days I became someone else without anyone noticing, not colder, not angry, just precise, because anger makes noise, and noise gives people time to react, but silence lets you finish what you started. And by the time Olivia walked back through that door with her suitcase and her practiced smile, everything that mattered had already been decided long before she realized there was a question waiting for her. The strange thing about betrayal is not the moment you discover it, it is everything that comes before, all the small moments you remember differently once you know the truth. And during those 14 days, while Olivia was living a life she thought I would never see, I found myself replaying hours in ways I never had before, not with anger, not even with sadness, but with a kind of clarity that only shows up when something is already broken and you are just now realizing how long it has been that way, because this did not start with a trip, it did not start with Daniel, it started much earlier, in the quiet shifts that are easy to dismiss when you still believe everything is fine, like the way Olivia stopped asking real questions about my day and replaced them with quick check-ins that sounded more like obligation than interest, or the way she started keeping her phone face down on the table, not hiding it, just placing it in a position that made it harder to glance at, subtle, deliberate, almost polite, and at the time I told myself it was nothing. Just habits changing, people evolving, relationships settling into something quieter, something more routine. But routine is where distance hides, and distance is where everything else begins. I remember one night about 6 months before the trip, we were sitting in the living room, television on, either of us really watching it, and she laughed at something on her phone, not loud, not exaggerated, just enough to catch my attention. And when I asked what it was, she said it was a coworker joke. Something about Daniel. The name slipped into conversation so naturally that I did not think twice about it, not then, not in that moment, because people have coworkers, people have inside jokes, people have connections that exist outside of marriage, and none of that is a problem until it becomes something else, something quieter, something more consistent, something that starts showing up in places it does not belong. Like weekend conversations, like late-night messages, like the way his name started appearing without explanation, and even then, I did not question it, because trust is not something you turn off overnight, it fades slowly, almost invisibly, until one day you realize you have been trusting a version of someone that no longer exists, and that realization does not come with noise, it comes with silence, the same silence I felt sitting in my office during those 14 days, going through email. Not that I trusted her, but that I trusted the idea of us more than I paid attention to what was actually happening, but that mistake does not last forever, because eventually, reality replaces memory, and when it does, everything becomes simple in a way that is almost unsettling, not easy, not painless, just clear, and clarity changes how you move, it changes what you say, what you do not say, what you allow and what you stop pretending not to see. So by the time Olivia stepped back into our house with that suitcase and that smile she thought still worked, I was not standing there as the man she left behind 2 weeks earlier. I was standing there as someone who had already walked through every version of the truth and come out the other side without needing her to explain a single thing. Olivia did not hesitate long enough for someone who had nothing to hide, but she also did not panic the way someone caught completely off guard might have. Instead she smiled, small, controlled, the same practiced expression I had seen at company events and dinner parties, the kind of smile that says everything is fine even when it is not, and she stepped inside like she still belonged there without question, setting her suitcase down by the stairs as if it was just another trip, just another normal return to a normal life. And for a moment, if I had not known what I knew, I might have believed it too, because she was good at that, good at making things feel seamless, like there was never a break in continuity, like those 14 days did not exist outside of her version of them. She walked past me, brushed her fingers lightly against my arm, a familiar gesture, casual, almost automatic, and asked about my week. Her voice steady, her tone light, as if she expected everything to continue exactly where she left it, and that was when I understood something important. She was not just hoping I did not know, she was convinced of it, convinced enough to continue the performance without adjusting a single detail. And that level of confidence does not come from careful planning alone, it comes from repetition, from believing the story you are telling is stronger than the reality you are hiding. So I let her talk, I let her fill the silence with details about meetings, about networking dinners, about long days and early mornings, all the things she had already mentioned in her messages, all the things I already knew were not true, and I listened the same way I had been listening for the past 2 weeks, not reacting, not interrupting, just observing, because the more she spoke, the more the gap between her words and the truth widened, and that gap is where control lives. She moved through the house like nothing had changed, opening the fridge, commenting on how empty it was, asking if I had been eating properly, small concerns that sounded like care but felt more like routine, like lines she had said so many times they no longer required thought, and I answered her simply, calmly, giving her nothing to question, nothing to push against, because this was not the moment for confrontation, not yet. This was the moment for confirmation, the final piece, the last chance. For her to choose honesty before I removed the option entirely. And she did not take it, she never even considered it. Instead she continued, explaining how exhausting the trip had been, how much she needed to rest, how good it felt to be home. And that was the word that stayed with me, home, because for her, it was still that, a place she could return to without consequence, without explanation, without disruption. And maybe that was true before, maybe that was the version of our life she believed still existed, but it was not the one I was standing in anymore. I watched her pick up her suitcase again, start toward the stairs, already moving on from the conversation like it had served its purpose, like she had successfully re-entered the life she left behind, and that was when I spoke, not louder, not sharper, just enough to stop her mid-step, because timing matters, and control is not about what you say. It is about when you decide to say it. And as she turned back toward me, still holding that same expression, still expecting the same man she walked out on 2 weeks ago, I realized something else. This was the last normal moment she was going to have in that house, and she did not even know it yet. I did not repeat the question right away, not because I was unsure, but because silence has a way of doing the work for you if you let it, and as Olivia turned to face me fully, I could see it in her eyes, that brief flicker where confidence meets uncertainty, where a person starts to wonder if the script they have been following still applies. She shifted her weight slightly, still holding the suitcase, still halfway between leaving the moment behind and stepping into something she did not yet understand, and I kept my posture relaxed, my voice level, because this was not about emotion anymore, it was about precision, and precision does not rush. It waits until everything is exactly where it needs to be before it moves. I took a step closer, not aggressively, not confrontational, just enough to close the distance between us, enough to make it clear that this conversation was not optional. And I watched her carefully, the way her fingers tightened just slightly around the handle, the way her smile did not quite return the same way it had before, small details, but details that told me everything I needed to know. She was starting to feel it. Not the truth itself, but the shift, the change in balance that happens when one person knows something the other does not expect, and that is when I asked it again, not louder, not sharper, just clearer. Which part do you want to lie about first? And this time, the question did not just hang in the air, it landed. I could see it in the way her expression paused, like her mind was trying to catch up to a conversation she did not realize she was already in, and for a second, she tried to recover. Tried to redirect, asking me what I meant, giving a small laugh that sounded just a fraction too late, just a fraction too forced, but I did not respond to that, because answering her question would have given her time, and time was the one thing she did not have anymore. Instead I let the silence stretch again, let her sit in it. Let her feel the weight of it without knowing exactly why it was there, and that is when people start making mistakes, when they fill the silence with explanations that were never asked for. She set the suitcase down slowly this time, her movements more deliberate, more cautious. like she was trying to regain control over something she could feel slipping but could not yet define. She started talking about the trip again, about schedules, about delays, about how exhausting it had been, but her voice had changed, just slightly. The rhythm was off, the confidence not as steady as it had been moments earlier. And I listened the same way I had been listening for days, not to the content, but to the structure, to the gaps, to the places where truth should have been but was replaced with something else. And when she finished, when she reached that point where most people expect reassurance or reaction, I did something she was not prepared for. I nodded once, calmly, like I had just heard something that confirmed exactly what I already knew, and then I walked past her, not away, not disengaging, but moving with intention, because this conversation was not going to happen in fragments. It was going to happen all at once, on my terms. I reached the kitchen counter where my phone was resting, picked it up without looking back at her immediately, giving the moment just enough distance to build tension, and when I finally turned around, I did not raise my voice, I did not accuse, I simply held the phone in my hand and said, "We can start with the hotel in Miami, or we can start with Daniel's calendar. Either way, the story stays the same." And that was the moment everything shifted completely, not because of what I said, but because of what she realized. This was not suspicion, this was not a guess, this was something else entirely, something finished, something she was no longer in control of. Olivia did not move at first, not even a step, not even a shift in posture, just a stillness that did not belong to someone who had control of the situation anymore. And I watched it happen in real time, the moment where denial stops being useful and reality starts pressing in from all sides. Her eyes moved, not wildly, not dramatically, just slightly, like she was scanning for an exit that was no longer there. And when she finally spoke, it was not with the same confidence, not with the same rhythm she had been using all evening. It was slower, more careful, like every word had to pass through a filter before it could leave her mouth. She asked me how I could think something like that, tried to bring the conversation back to emotion, to make it about trust, about misunderstanding, about the kind of conflict that can still be repaired if both people agree to pretend long enough. But I did not follow her there, because this was not a misunderstanding, and I was not interested in negotiating something that had already been decided. I set my phone down on the counter, not to hide it, but to remove the distraction, because the evidence was not the point anymore. The point was that she knew I had it, and that knowledge was already doing what it needed to do. She took a step toward me then, small, cautious, like she was testing whether proximity could change the situation, like being closer might soften the edges of what was happening. And for a second, I saw something real break through, not guilt exactly, not yet, but uncertainty, the kind that comes when a plan stops working and you do not have another one ready. She started explaining again, different version this time, different details, adding layers that were not there before, and that was when it became obvious, not just that she had lied, but that she did not even know which version of the truth she was trying to protect anymore. And that is the problem. With building something on lies, you have to keep rebuilding it every time it is questioned, and eventually, you run out of structure to hold it together. I let her speak until she reached the end of whatever version she was constructing, until the words slowed and the space between them grew wider, until she looked at me expecting something, anything, a reaction, a question, a sign that this was still a conversation she could influence. And instead I gave her none of that. I just looked at her, steady, calm, the same way I had been looking at everything for the past 2 weeks. And then I said something simple, something that did not sound like an argument, did not sound like an accusation, but carried more weight than either of those ever could. "You booked the room together, Olivia." And I watched the effect of that sentence land, not loud, not explosive, just final, because there is a difference between being confronted with a possibility and being confronted with a fact, and facts do not invite debate, they do not ask for interpretation, they just exist. And in that moment, she knew that whatever version of events she had been holding on to was no longer enough. Her shoulders dropped slightly, not in defeat, but in recognition, like she understood that the situation had moved past the point where performance could fix it. And that was when the silence returned, heavier this time, more complete, because now it was shared, now it was something we were both standing in, but only one of us had chosen it, and I stayed there, not moving, not filling it, because this was the moment everything shifted fully. Not just in what I knew, but in what she could no longer deny, and once that shift happens, there is no going back to the version of the story that existed before. She tried one last time to hold on to control, but it was different now, slower, heavier. Like every word had to push through something that was already collapsing. She shook her head slightly, not in denial, but in delay, buying seconds she did not know how to use, saying it was not what it looked like, saying there were explanations, always plural, always vague, and that was when I realized something else. This was not about convincing me anymore, it was about convincing herself that there was still a version of this she could survive, and I did not interrupt that. I let it run its course, because the more she spoke, the clearer it became that there was no structure left, just fragments, disconnected pieces trying to form something that no longer held together. And when her voice finally trailed off, when the space between her words stretched too far to bridge, I stepped in, not to argue, not to escalate. Just to finish what had already started. I reached for the folder on the counter, something she had not noticed when she walked in, something that had been sitting there quietly the entire time, and I opened it without ceremony, without emphasis, just another action in a sequence that had already been decided. I turned it toward her, not pushing it, not forcing it, just placing it where she could see, and inside were the details she thought existed only in the space between her and Daniel, confirmations, dates, timestamps, simple, factual, undeniable. The kind of information that does not need interpretation because it speaks for itself, and I watched her eyes move across the page, slowly at first, then faster, not because she was processing it, but because she was searching for something missing, something she could challenge, something she could hold on to, and she did not find it, because there was nothing missing, everything was there exactly as it happened, exactly as she chose it, and that is when the shift completed, not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet understanding settling in. She was no longer ahead of the situation, she was inside something she could not control. She looked up at me then, not with anger, not even with defense, just with something closer to realization, like she was finally seeing the same version of events I had been living with for the past 2 weeks, and for a moment neither of us spoke, because there was nothing left to say that would change what was already established, and in that silence, something else became clear. This was not the moment of destruction she might have expected. There was no shouting, no accusations thrown back and forth, no attempt to rewrite what had already been written, because this was not about breaking anything, it had already been broken long before this conversation started. This was about acknowledgement, about bringing what was hidden into a space where it could not pretend to be something else anymore. And when I finally spoke again, it was not to ask a question, not to demand an answer, just to state something simple. Something final. I already know everything that matters. And I let that sit there between us, not as a threat, not as a punishment, but as the truth she had been avoiding since the moment she decided to leave for those 14 days. And in that moment, she understood. Something she had not considered before. This was never about whether she could explain it. It was about the fact that there was nothing left worth explaining. Olivia did not pick up the folder again after that. She did not try to argue, did not try to reframe it, because something in her had already shifted from defense to acceptance, not loud, not visible in any dramatic way, but present in the way her shoulders lowered just slightly, in the way her eyes no longer searched for an opening, and I stood there watching it happen without stepping in to guide it. Because this part does not need help, it happens on its own when the truth settles in. Completely. And for the first time since she walked through that door, she looked at me without the performance, without the practiced tone, just quiet, just present, and in that moment, I realized something that surprised me more than anything else. I was not angry, not in the way people expect, not in the way stories usually go. There was no rush of emotion, no need to raise my voice or demand anything from her. Because anger requires uncertainty, it feeds on not knowing, on needing answers, on wanting something to be different, and I had none of that left. I already knew everything that mattered. I had already walked through every version of this in my head long before she came back, and once you do that, once you process it fully, what is left is not anger, it is clarity, and clarity changes how you move. It simplifies things in a way that feels almost cold but is actually just precise. I stepped away from the counter then, not turning my back on her, just creating space, the kind of space that makes it clear something has ended without needing to say it directly. And I told her what I had already decided days ago, calmly, without emphasis. I spoke to a lawyer. And I watched that land differently than everything else, because this was not about what had happened, this was about what was going to happen next, and the future is where consequences live. She did not interrupt, did not ask questions right away, just stood there absorbing it, the same way she had. Absorb everything else, and I continued, not explaining every detail, not outlining every step, just enough to make it clear that this was already in motion, that this was not a reaction. It was a plan, and plans do not get undone by apologies or explanations, they move forward unless something stronger stops them, and there was nothing stronger left here. I told her she could take the time she needed to gather her things, that we would handle everything through proper channels, simple, direct, no hostility, no negotiation, just structure, and that was when I saw it fully, not regret exactly, not even sadness in the way people describe it, but recognition. The kind that comes too late to change anything but early enough to understand what was lost, and I did not stay there to watch it unfold, because this was not something I needed to witness. I had already seen enough. Instead, I picked up my keys from the counter, the same place they had been every day for years, and walked toward the door, the house quiet behind me in a way it had not been before, not tense, not heavy, just empty of something that used to be there. And as I stepped outside, the air felt different, not lighter, not heavier, just clear, like everything had finally settled into its real shape without distortion. And I paused for a second, not out of hesitation, but out of acknowledgement, because endings deserve that much at least. And then I walked to my car, got in, and drove away without looking back. Because some things do not need a final glance to be finished, they end the moment you understand them completely. And for me, that moment had already happened long before she ever came home.